Let's start here. Former Gauteng bookkeeper Lindelani Gumede has been sentenced to 135 years in prison for 32 counts of fraud involving at least 11 million rand. This in connection with COVID-19 relief funds. Of course, some sentences will run concurrently, resulting effectively in a 20-year prison sentence. ENCA's Silindelo Masikane was in court today. She joins me now. Slee, this is actually quite a satisfying piece of information, isn't it? Because we all got really angry when we realised COVID funds meant to help people in economic distress, meant to help people who were sick as well, were being looted. So this must have been a very satisfying story to cover. Tell us more.
I mean, I think it's quite interesting to see some prosecutions taking place finally. We know that millions of rands were essentially looted from the state during that period, a period where we were going through the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. These funds were released in order to be able to assist those who were really most affected. They lost their jobs, they couldn't work, and this money, essentially we had criminals like Gumede taking advantage of the not so strict controls as to how these funds were being released. So he had an advantage in terms of the fact that he's a bookkeeper, and he used the information from some of the companies that were consulting with him, in fact 4 bakeries, taking the employment information, using their UIF numbers, their employee numbers, registering them under his company, and then basically benefiting more than 11 million rand between May of 2020 as well as March of 2021. I mean, 32 counts means that he did it over and over and over again. And we know that he used it to fund a very luxurious lifestyle, from buying very expensive cars to buying land, even some vacations here and there.
I mean, it's astonishing because this then is money that would have gone to deserving recipients, people who are really battling during the lockdown. Instead, he siphons it off himself, using their particulars. Interesting how Lindelani Gumede's lawyer is saying, well, he shouldn't really have to serve a custodial sentence, he doesn't deserve to go to prison. What did he say? So,
of course, today was mitigation and aggravation of sentencing, and her lawyer really tried her best to kind of paint him as somebody who had, you know, presented himself, didn't waste the court's time. I mean, he pleaded guilty. He's got a child that apparently depends on him, but the state's then saying, no, he's not the primary caregiver. In fact, he hasn't, you know, supported his child for some time now. The child doesn't even live with him. But let's just take a listen to his lawyer, who tried to paint a picture that the accused, or should I say the convicted fraudster, should not actually get a sentence in prison.
The accused comes from an impoverished background. Now, as the sole breadwinner in his family, and at the time of uncertainty, the accused was unsure of his financial future, and that of his entire family. The accused discovered that the UIF system was flawed, as the applications were approved and payments were made without proper verification. At this point, the accused committed the offense and was succumbed to temptation induced by the implied perception of reality due to the financial distress and fear induced by the social conditions of our country at that time.
But the magistrate was having none of that, right?
Nothing. In fact, quite annoyed, I think, because this money, Sally, I mean, you can imagine the amount of people who are still to this day waiting for their COVID-19 TERS relief funds. The people who are affected, those employees whose ID numbers were used by Gumede, they can't claim. This needs to be wrapped up before their numbers are cleared, and then they can be able to get their funds as well. So the magistrate was actually quite clear to say that he wants this sentence to serve as a deterrent. Anybody who's thinking of even doing anything similar to this should know that the courts are going to deal with them quite harshly, because, you know, white-collar crime is usually you don't see these kinds of sentences. So I think what the courts are trying to do is really show the public that they're going to be dealing with these kinds of matters. Let's take a listen.
Unashamedly, brazen, in exploiting the weakness of the emergency measures that were put in place. It is acceptable that the period itself was that of a state of emergency. Money said to be disbursed as a matter of urgency. Many people were temporarily halted from continuing with their employment. Had the Department of Labor exercised caution and tried to establish the validity of all the claims, monies would have been paid months and months later, and this would have led many people to suffer.
Yeah, you can see he's not at all happy. But 135 years, effectively 20 years in prison for Lindelani Gumede. I would imagine the NPA is very satisfied with that.
Very. I mean, this is the first successful conviction of the COVID-19 UIFTers here in Gauteng, and they're hoping that they'll be able to have even more of these convictions. Let's take a listen to the spokesperson.
As the NPA, we welcome the sentence. We believe that it is a suitable and just sentence, taking into consideration the seriousness of the offences that were committed by the accused person. Remember that this was money that was meant to provide relief to many citizens out there who were left impoverished because of COVID-19. So we believe that having stolen money from these coffers left many of our citizens destitute, and it then meant that money was diverted away from assisting, from giving much needed assistance to the citizens that were left destitute because of COVID-19.
Yeah, it certainly seems swift justice. As you make the point, though, Gumede did plead guilty, so I would imagine that speeded things up quite significantly. Any chance of an appeal, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, he did plead guilty, and he did, for the duration, he was out on bail. I must say his family was quite devastated after court, wailing at some points, but I don't see any likelihood of an appeal at this stage. But I think for the justice system, this is obviously a win, and I think we're all hoping as South Africans to see much more of these prosecutions.